Varibrus.
I'm afraid your son Charlie has been stabbed and he's critical. We got up there, we were greeted by another consultant called Alex and a critical care nurse who said, we need to prepare you for how Charlie's going to look. What we were greeted with will stay with me for the rest of my life.
In July 2023, over 100 teenagers gathered at a £1.5 million farmhouse in Warnham, West Sussex, for an end-of-term party. The celebration should have been a night of fun before summer break. Instead, it became the scene of a fatal stabbing that would end one life and destroy another. Varibrus, 16, brought a knife to the party, and before the night ended, he would use it. The evening began with heavy drinking among the guests. A dispute arose after allegations of inappropriate behavior toward a guest, leading to Varibrus and his friends being asked to leave. Rather than departing peacefully, tensions escalated. On the crowded dance floor where teenagers were celebrating, a fight erupted. Varibrus stabbed 17-year-old Charlie Cosser 3 times in the chest, striking with enough force to sever his aorta. The wounds caused massive internal bleeding. Charlie, from Milford, Surrey, collapsed on the grass outside the farmhouse. Emergency services rushed him to the hospital, but he suffered cardiac arrest during transport. 2 days later, Charlie died from his injuries. What happened to the weapon used? The knife was never recovered, disappearing amid the chaos of the party's aftermath. Witnesses reported seeing Varibrus drenched in blood, and he allegedly admitted, "I've stabbed someone." The statements from partygoers helped investigators piece together what occurred on that crowded dance floor. Varibrus claimed he couldn't remember the stabbing due to alcohol consumption. His defense would later emphasize this amnesia, though prosecutors argued that choosing to bring a knife to the party and having it accessible during a confrontation showed dangerous decision-making regardless of intoxication levels. Identified through witness accounts, Varibrus was arrested shortly after the incident. He initially pleaded guilty to charges just days after Charlie's death, but later proceeded to trial at Brighton Crown Court. The jury convicted him on all counts, including possession of a bladed article. Due to the gravity of the case, reporting restrictions that typically protect juvenile offenders were lifted. How did the court determine his sentence? In June 2024, Judge Christine Henson sentenced Varibrus to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years before parole eligibility. The judge noted the immeasurable loss suffered by Charlie's family and rejected claims of self-defense. The decision to bring a knife to a social gathering was identified as a key aggravating factor that escalated what might have been a fistfight into a fatal encounter. His defense attorney stated, "He will always be known for something he cannot even remember. That was the work of a drunken few seconds," attempting to characterize the act as an alcohol-fueled moment rather than a deliberate choice. However, the court emphasized that bringing a weapon created the conditions for tragedy. Charlie's father, Martin Cosser, delivered a victim impact statement saying, "I've been trying hard not to think of his last moments. This world is worse off without my beautiful little boy." The family's grief extended beyond personal loss to concern for broader knife issues affecting young people. In response to the tragedy, Charlie's family founded Charlie's Promise, a charitable organization dedicated to preventing knife-related incidents among teenagers. Within a year, they raised £130,000 to support anti-knife initiatives and education programs. Their work transformed personal grief into community action, attempting to prevent other families from experiencing similar devastation. Varibrus remains in youth detention in the UK, serving his sentence. At 16 during the offense, he won't be eligible for parole consideration until his early 30s. The next case would unfold outside a school, where another teenager carried a blade with deadly intent. Bardia Shojifard. On November 7, 2023, students and staff at St. Margaret's Primary School in Horsforth, Leeds, witnessed something no one should see. Bardia Shojayefard, 14, attacked 15-year-old Alfie Lewis in broad daylight, just outside the school grounds. The stabbing occurred as young students were present, traumatizing witnesses who saw the confrontation unfold. Shojayefard had carried a 13-centimeter kitchen knife from his home all day, waiting for the opportunity to use it. When he encountered Alfie, who was walking to meet friends, Shojayefard struck twice. One stab wound pierced Alfie's chest, puncturing his heart. The second struck his leg. The injuries were immediately fatal, with Alfie collapsing as Shojayefard fled the scene. The knife used in the attack was dropped nearby, still covered in blood. The weapon matched a set from Shojayefard's home, providing clear forensic evidence linking him to the stabbing. Blood analysis confirmed the connection, eliminating any doubt about who wielded the blade. What motivated this attack outside a primary school? The incident stemmed from a Halloween confrontation where Alfie had allegedly threatened Shojayefard over fireworks. Rather than involving adults or allowing the situation to diffuse, Shojayefard decided on revenge. His decision to carry a knife from home demonstrated premeditation that prosecutors would emphasize during trial. Investigation revealed troubling details about Shojayefard's mindset. He had what the judge described as a worrying interest in knives, with photographs of blades stored on his phone. This fascination with weapons wasn't a secret hobby, but an obsession that ultimately led to Alfie's death. Shojayefard claimed self-defense, arguing he feared for his life based on the Halloween incident. However, the evidence contradicted this narrative. Carrying a knife all day and seeking out Alfie suggested planning rather than spontaneous self-protection. The judge called the attack carefully planned and vicious, rejecting the self-defense argument entirely. How did the justice system respond? Arrested within an hour of the stabbing, Shojayefard faced trial at Leeds Crown Court. The 2-week trial in April 2024 heard evidence from witnesses, forensic experts, and investigators who had examined his phone records and knife collection. The jury convicted him on all charges. Normally, juvenile offenders receive anonymity protections. However, reporting restrictions were lifted in Shojayefard's case with the specific goal of deterring other teenagers from carrying knives. Authorities wanted his name and face associated with the consequences of bringing blades to confrontations. In June 2024, Judge Cotter sentenced Shojayefard to life detention with a minimum term of 13 years. The judge stated directly, "Without your interest in knives, Alfie would be here today," making clear that the weapon obsession was central to the tragedy. Alfie's mother, Heather Lane, said, "No sentence will ever be enough to compensate for losing her son." His aunt added simply, "We are devastated," words that captured the family's profound grief. Shojayefard remains in detention in the UK, serving his sentence. His earliest possible release date would come around 2030, when he reaches his late 20s. The case became a focal point in discussions about teenage knife carrying in Britain, where blade-related incidents among young people have risen significantly. But the next case takes us back in time to a different kind of street confrontation. Jordan Jobson. In August 2007, Jordan Jobson, 15, spent an evening consuming vodka, lager, and cocaine. The combination impaired her judgment significantly, but what happened next went beyond intoxication. In a Wallsend alley in North Tyneside, she encountered 18-year-old Samantha Magin during a chaotic street brawl. Samantha was a new mother on her first night out since giving birth. She had no involvement in the original dispute but intervened when she saw people fighting, trying to break up the confrontation. That decision cost her everything. Jobson stabbed Samantha 10 times in the alley, inflicting wounds that pierced her lung and severed an artery. The injuries caused rapid blood loss that emergency responders couldn't overcome. The attack was frenzied and sustained. 10 separate stab wounds indicated continued assault rather than a single panicked strike. Samantha had tried to be a peacemaker, and Jobson targeted her for reasons that remained unclear even during trial. The senselessness of her death made the tragedy even more painful for her family. What defense did Jobson offer for her actions? Jobson claimed self-defense, arguing she felt threatened during the brawl. However, evidence contradicted this narrative. Prosecutors demonstrated that the attack showed intent to cause serious harm, with the number and placement of wounds indicating aggression rather than defensive action. The intoxication defense also failed to sway the jury. Arrested after the incident, Jobson faced trial at Newcastle Crown Court in 2008. The jury deliberated swiftly, taking little time to reach a guilty verdict. The evidence was overwhelming, with witness testimony, forensic analysis, and the victim's lack of any weapons or aggressive behavior all pointing to Jobson as the aggressor. The sentencing sparked controversy that would last for years. Initially, Jobson received life imprisonment with a 15-year minimum term. However, appeals followed that would reduce this sentence significantly, causing fresh pain for Samantha's family each time. How much time did Jobson actually serve? The sentence was ultimately reduced to 11 years minimum on appeal, with judges deeming the original term excessive. The reduction meant Jobson became eligible for release much sooner than the victim's family had anticipated. In 2020, she was released on license, theoretically under supervision and conditions meant to ensure public safety. The release proved premature. Within 6 months, Jobson breached the conditions of her license and was recalled to prison in 2021. The specific nature of the breach wasn't publicly detailed, but it demonstrated she hadn't successfully reintegrated into society. The recall offered Samantha's family some relief, though it reopened wounds that had begun to heal. For Samantha's family, the legal proceedings felt like repeated injustice. Her mother, Allison Madgen, became an advocate for knife crime prevention, channeling her grief into action. She has worked tirelessly to educate young people about the consequences of carrying blades and the permanent damage caused by moments of drunken rage. Samantha's infant son grew up without his mother, raised by her family, who had to explain why she wasn't there for his milestones. Birthdays, school events, graduations, all carried the absence of someone who should have been present. The ripple effects of that night in 2007 continue affecting multiple generations. As of recent years, Jobson's exact whereabouts and status remain unclear in public records, though the recall to prison in 2021 suggested she remained under some form of custody or supervision. Another case would involve a family member as the victim. Logan McPhail.
The defendant was convicted by the jury of the murder of Holly Newton and of wounding a young person, CD, with intent to do him really serious harm.
The case of Logan McPhail involves circumstances too disturbing to detail fully. At 16, McPhail was responsible for the death of someone within his own household. The victim's connection to McPhail created a situation where trust was fundamental, making the betrayal particularly devastating. Court proceedings revealed a pattern of behavior that escalated over time rather than occurring as a single incident. Evidence presented during trial showed severe injuries that indicated sustained harm rather than a momentary loss of control. The forensic evidence painted a picture of repeated actions that resulted in fatal consequences. What family dynamics led to this tragedy? Investigators examined the household environment, looking for factors that might explain McPhail's actions. Family resentment appeared to play a role, with tensions building over time within the home. However, these tensions didn't justify what occurred, and prosecutors emphasized that many people experience family conflict without resorting to such extreme measures. The trial presented challenges for everyone involved. The details of what happened were difficult for jury members to hear, with some evidence so disturbing that special arrangements were made for its presentation. Witnesses struggled to recount what they knew, and the victims' family members faced the impossible task of seeking justice while processing their grief. MacPhail was convicted and sentenced to life detention with a minimum term of 17 years. The lengthy minimum reflected both the severity of the actions and the vulnerable nature of the victim. The judge emphasized that MacPhail had violated fundamental trust within the family structure. The sentence means MacPhail won't be eligible for parole consideration until his early 30s. During his incarceration, he has access to programs aimed at addressing the factors that contributed to his actions. Whether these interventions can produce genuine change remains uncertain. While that case unfolded within a family, another teenager would target someone outside the household. Aidan Zellmer.
What is going on?
Look at me, nobody.
I didn't do anything, I swear. Mom, what's gonna happen to me?
In Colorado, Aidan Zellmer was convicted of causing the death of his stepsister. The case involved circumstances that prosecutors described as particularly disturbing, though full details cannot be disclosed due to the nature of the victim and the events. The incident occurred in Thornton, with emergency responders arriving to find a situation that immediately triggered a homicide investigation. The victim had suffered significant trauma, with forensic evidence collected at the scene providing crucial information about what had transpired. DNA analysis would later confirm connections between Zellmer and the crime scene. Zellmer's background revealed someone who had reportedly experienced difficulties, though these factors didn't excuse his actions in the court's view. Mental health evaluations were conducted to assess his psychological state, but ultimately the focus remained on accountability for choices made. How did investigators build their case? Physical evidence proved critical in establishing what happened. The forensic team documented injuries and collected biological material that tied Zellmer to the scene. Witness statements from others in the household provided context about the timeline and circumstances surrounding the incident. The trial in Colorado presented the evidence systematically, with prosecutors walking the jury through each element of their case. The defense attempted to introduce mitigating factors, including Zellmer's background and potential mental health issues, but the severity of what occurred overshadowed these considerations. In 2019, Zellmer was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. The lengthy minimum term reflected the court's determination that he represented a significant danger and needed extensive time for any potential rehabilitation. At his age during sentencing, he would be in his late 50s before parole eligibility. Zellmer remains incarcerated in Colorado's prison system, where he is housed with adult offenders given his age at sentencing and the nature of his conviction. His daily routine follows institutional schedules, with limited freedom and constant supervision that will continue for decades. But the next case would involve a teenager concealing a pregnancy with fatal results. Paris Mayo. In March 2023, emergency services in Herefordshire responded to a residence where they discovered the body of a newborn. Paris Mayo, 15, had given birth in secret and taken actions that resulted in the infant's death. The case would expose the extreme lengths teenagers sometimes go to hide pregnancies and the tragic outcomes that can follow. Mayo had concealed her pregnancy from everyone around her, managing to hide her changing body for months. She didn't seek prenatal care or confide in adults who might have provided support. When she went into labor, she delivered the baby alone without medical assistance, a dangerous situation for both mother and infant. The newborn, later named Stanley, never had a chance at life. Forensic examination revealed injuries including a skull fracture and evidence of suffocation. These findings indicated deliberate actions taken after birth, rather than complications during delivery. The medical examiner's report provided crucial evidence about the cause and manner of death. What drove a teenager to such desperate measures? Mayo's case highlighted the fear and isolation that can accompany teenage pregnancy, especially when young people feel they cannot turn to parents or other adults for help. She later expressed that she feared reactions from her family and felt overwhelmed by the situation. However, the court emphasized that fear didn't justify the fatal outcome. Investigation revealed that Mayo had researched pregnancy and childbirth online, but hadn't sought legitimate medical resources. She had made some preparations for the birth, but hadn't considered options like safe haven laws that allow parents to surrender newborns at designated locations without facing prosecution. The discovery of Stanley's body triggered a comprehensive investigation. Police examined Mayo's internet search history, interviewed family members and friends, and collected physical evidence from the scene. The forensic pathology report established that the infant had been born alive, a critical element in pursuing charges. How did the UK justice system handle this case? Mayo faced trial with prosecutors presenting evidence of deliberate actions that caused Stanley's death. The defense attempted to argue that Mayo had panicked and wasn't thinking clearly after giving birth alone. However, the specific injuries suggested more than panic-driven behavior. In June 2023, Mayo was sentenced to life detention with a minimum term of 12 years. The judge acknowledged her youth and the difficult circumstances, but emphasized that she had choices available and chose the one that resulted in death. The sentence reflected both her age and the vulnerability of the victim. Mayo remains in detention in the UK, serving her sentence. She won't be eligible for parole consideration until her late 20s. During her incarceration, she has access to counseling and educational programs designed to address the factors that contributed to her actions. For Stanley, the brief moments of life he experienced ended before he could know love, security, or any of the experiences every person deserves. His death represents not just the loss of who he was, but all the potential of who he might have become. The tragedy extends beyond the immediate incident to encompass all the years of life denied to him. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. But another case would involve a family member and a hatchet. Raistlin Martin. In North Carolina, Raistlin Martin lived with his grandfather, a relationship that prosecutors said had deteriorated significantly. Martin, a teenager dealing with isolation and reported difficulties in the household, made a decision that would end his grandfather's life and destroy his own future. The attack occurred in their Fayetteville home, where Martin used a hatchet as the weapon. The assault resulted in 31 wounds, indicating a sustained and brutal encounter rather than a single strike. The number and nature of injuries suggested extreme force applied repeatedly, creating a scene that shocked even experienced investigators who responded. Martin's defense team presented evidence of alleged mistreatment within the household. They argued he had endured difficult conditions that contributed to his mental state at the time of the incident. The claim centered on paternal influence and dynamics that had shaped Martin's perspective and reactions. What did the investigation reveal? Forensic examination documented each of the 31 wounds, establishing the cause of death and the weapon used. The autopsy provided detailed information about the sequence of events and the level of force employed. Physical evidence from the scene corroborated the medical examiner's findings. Investigators interviewed neighbors, family members, and others who knew both Martin and his grandfather. These conversations revealed a household where tensions existed, though accounts differed about the severity and nature of the relationship problems. Some witnesses described Martin as withdrawn and troubled, while others noted his grandfather's demeanor and approach to discipline. The trial examined whether Martin's claims about his treatment justified his actions or provided mitigating circumstances. Prosecutors acknowledged that the household had issues, but argued that these didn't excuse the extreme response. Mental health experts testified about Martin's psychological state, though their conclusions varied about his capacity to understand consequences. How did North Carolina's court system respond? Martin was tried and convicted on charges related to his grandfather's death. The jury heard evidence about both the crime itself and the background that led to that moment. In February 2018, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Martin remains incarcerated in North Carolina, serving his sentence. His earliest possible parole date would come when he's in his 40s, having spent the majority of his adult life behind bars. During his incarceration, he has access to programs aimed at addressing anger management and family dynamics, though whether these prove effective won't be known until parole consideration. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, another teenager was about to make a fatal decision. Shondell Jackson.
The 19-year-old convicted killer himself begged for mercy.
Apologize for my behaviors. Please don't take my life from me.
When the judge announced a sentence of life in prison with no chance for parole, it sparked an outburst.
In 2009, Milwaukee experienced another tragedy involving a teenage offender whose actions would result in the harshest possible sentence. Shondell Jackson, 15, participated in a robbery that escalated beyond theft. When the situation spiraled, he made a choice that ended someone's life and sealed his own fate. The incident involved a planned robbery attempt. Jackson and others had targeted a victim they believed had money or valuables worth stealing. During the encounter, Jackson fired a weapon, striking the victim in the chest. The gunshot wound proved fatal, transforming a robbery into a homicide case. Jackson came from a disadvantaged background with limited support systems. His environment lacked positive influences that might have steered him away from criminal activity. Prior to this incident, he had accumulated some involvement with the justice system, suggesting a pattern of escalating behavior that adults around him had failed to redirect effectively. What happened in the courtroom? The trial proceeded with Jackson facing adult charges due to the serious nature of the offense. Wisconsin's legal system allowed juveniles accused of certain serious crimes to be moved into adult court, and prosecutors exercised this option. The evidence against Jackson included witness testimony, ballistics analysis, and forensic evidence from the scene. During sentencing, Jackson had an outburst that required intervention. Deputies had to physically restrain him when the judge delivered the verdict and sentence. His reaction suggested difficulty accepting responsibility for the outcome, displaying anger rather than remorse at a moment when contrition might have served him better. The judge imposed a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, the harshest penalty available. Wisconsin was one of the states that allowed such sentences for juvenile offenders who committed certain crimes, though this practice has faced increasing criticism from criminal justice reform advocates. The sentence meant Jackson would spend the rest of his life behind bars with no opportunity for release, regardless of any rehabilitation or change he might demonstrate during incarceration. At 15 during the offense, he faced decades of imprisonment with no hope of freedom, a reality that sparked debate about appropriate consequences for teenage offenders. For the victim's family, the permanent sentence provided some measure of justice, though it couldn't restore what was taken. They had lost someone whose life ended because of a robbery attempt, a senseless tragedy that occurred over material possessions that could never equal a human life's value. Jackson's case became a reference point in discussions about life without parole sentences for juveniles. Advocacy groups like those behind Change.org petitions have argued that such sentences violate principles of rehabilitation, and don't account for brain development research showing teenagers lack full impulse control. Jackson remains in a Wisconsin prison facility, serving his life sentence. His daily routine follows institutional schedules, with no parole hearings to prepare for or hope of eventual release. The permanence of his situation stands in stark contrast to the impulsive decision that led to the fatal shooting. But the next case would involve a planned confrontation between teenagers. Camila Shaila Hernandez Rivas. In Nevada, a dispute between teenagers escalated into a planned confrontation that would end in death. Camila Shaila Hernandez Rivas, known as Shaila, had ongoing tensions with another student. Rather than allowing the situation to diffuse or seeking adult intervention, she decided to arrange a fight. The victim was Chloe Edwards, 14, a classmate with whom Hernandez Rivas had been feuding. The two agreed to meet for a physical confrontation to settle their dispute, a decision that seemed logical in the moment but would prove fatal. When they met, Hernandez Rivas brought a knife to what was supposed to be a fistfight. During the confrontation, Hernandez Rivas stabbed Edwards multiple times. The knife wounds were severe, causing injuries that emergency responders couldn't overcome despite rapid arrival at the scene. Edwards died from the stabbing, transforming a teenage dispute into a homicide case. What led to this fatal escalation? The dispute between the two had been building through typical teenage social dynamics: disagreements, perceived slights, and tensions amplified by social media and peer pressure. Neither girl had significant prior criminal history, making the fatal outcome even more shocking to those who knew them. Hernandez Rivas struggled with mental health challenges that were documented before the incident. Her defense team would later argue that these issues affected her judgment and decision-making, though prosecutors countered that she had made deliberate choices, including bringing a weapon to the fight. The investigation examined phone records and social media communications that showed the fight had been planned. Messages between the girls and their respective friend groups documented the arrangement, establishing that this wasn't a spontaneous encounter, but rather a scheduled confrontation both parties agreed to attend. Forensic evidence from the scene included the knife used in the stabbing and blood evidence that corroborated witness accounts. Medical examiners documented each wound, providing detailed information about the attack sequence and the cause of death. How did Nevada's justice system handle this teenage-on-teenage case? Hernandez Rivas faced trial with prosecutors seeking adult charges given the premeditated nature of bringing a weapon. The defense emphasized her mental health struggles and argued for juvenile handling, but the severity of the outcome influenced the court's approach. The trial included testimony from friends who had witnessed the escalating tensions, mental health experts who evaluated Hernandez Rivas, and forensic specialists who explained the physical evidence. Edwards' family attended proceedings, ensuring their daughter's loss remained central to deliberations. In 2024, Hernandez Rivas was sentenced to 20 to 50 years in prison. The range meant she would serve at least 20 years before parole eligibility, with the possibility of remaining incarcerated for up to 50 years depending on her behavior and rehabilitation progress. The sentence reflected Nevada's determination that bringing a knife to what was supposed to be a fist fight demonstrated premeditation and intent beyond typical teenage conflict. The court emphasized that Edwards had agreed to a physical fight, not a lethal confrontation, and that Hernandez Rivas's weapon brought an unfair and fatal element to the encounter. For Edwards' family, the loss of their daughter over a teenage dispute seemed impossibly tragic. The triviality of the original disagreement compared to the permanent outcome highlighted how quickly situations can spiral beyond control when weapons enter teenage conflicts. Hernandez Rivas remains in a Nevada women's correctional facility, serving her sentence. She won't be eligible for parole consideration until she's in her 30s at minimum, having spent her entire young adulthood incarcerated. Her mental health challenges continue to receive treatment during imprisonment, though whether this addresses the underlying issues remains uncertain. Another case would involve different circumstances and evidence complications. David Lee Myers. The case of David Lee Myers in Ohio has taken unexpected turns decades after the original conviction. Myers was convicted of taking the life of 18-year-old Amanda Maher using a railroad spike and rock, a brutal method that shocked the community. However, recent developments have called into question the certainty of his guilt. The original trial in the 1990s relied on evidence that seemed conclusive at the time. Prosecutors built their case around physical evidence from the scene and circumstantial factors that pointed to Myers. The jury convicted him, and he was sentenced to death, facing execution for the crime. Amanda Maher's death left her family devastated, seeking justice for a young woman whose life ended violently. The conviction provided some closure, with Myers on death row awaiting execution. For years, the case seemed settled, with appeals exhausted and the legal process complete. What changed decades later? Advances in DNA technology allowed for testing that wasn't available during the original trial. When evidence from the crime scene was reanalyzed, DNA testing revealed that Myers' genetic material was not present on the railroad spike or rock used in the attack. This finding raised serious questions about whether he was actually the perpetrator. The DNA evidence didn't conclusively prove innocence, but it created reasonable doubt about the conviction's validity. If Myers' DNA wasn't on the weapons used, how confident could anyone be that he wielded them? The absence of his genetic material suggested either someone else committed the crime or the weapons recovered weren't actually used in the attack. In August 2024, Myers' death sentence was vacated, a stunning reversal for a case that had seemed concluded for decades. The court determined that the new DNA evidence warranted a fresh examination of the case, potentially including a new trial where this scientific information could be presented to a jury. How did the victim's family respond? Amanda Maher's daughter, Sarah Sparkman, opposes a retrial, expressing frustration with the reopening of her mother's case. For her, the original conviction provided closure that's now been disrupted. The possibility that Myers might be released or receive a reduced sentence feels like injustice, regardless of what DNA evidence suggests. Prosecutors face difficult decisions about how to proceed. They can retry Myers with the understanding that the DNA evidence will weaken their case, or they can negotiate a plea arrangement that acknowledges uncertainty while still holding him accountable for some level of culpability. As of 2025, Myers is on house arrest awaiting the outcome of appeals and hearing determinations. He's no longer on death row, but isn't fully free either, existing in a legal limbo while courts determine next steps. A hearing scheduled for September 2025 will address whether he receives a new trial and under what conditions. Meanwhile, in Indiana, another case involved a robbery gone wrong. Shane Thompson. In September 2013, Indianapolis experienced a series of robberies that would culminate in fatal consequences. Shane Thompson participated in a crime spree targeting gas stations and convenience stores. What began as property crimes escalated when resistance was met during one of these attempts. Thompson entered a gas station where clerk Evelide Ndiaye was working. During the robbery, Thompson shot Ndiaye, ending the clerk's life over money in a cash register. The shooting transformed a robbery into a capital offense, with Thompson now facing charges far more serious than theft. The crime spree had involved multiple locations across Indianapolis, with Thompson and possibly others hitting several businesses in rapid succession. Each robbery increased the risk of escalation, and when Ndiaye resisted or couldn't comply quickly enough, Thompson used deadly force. What evidence linked Thompson to the shooting? Investigators connected the robberies through security footage, witness descriptions, and physical evidence left at scenes. The gas station where Ndiaye was shot had cameras that captured the incident, providing clear documentation of Thompson's actions. The video footage became crucial evidence that removed any doubt about who fired the fatal shot. Ballistics analysis confirmed the weapon used, and recovered evidence connected Thompson to the crime scene. The investigation revealed a pattern of robberies leading up to the fatal shooting, establishing that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of ongoing criminal activity. Thompson's background provided limited explanation for his choices. Details about his upbringing and circumstances remain sparse in public records, though the impulsive nature of the robbery spree suggested someone operating without careful planning or consideration of consequences. How did Indiana's courts respond? Thompson pleaded guilty to charges related to Ndiaye's death, avoiding a trial where the video evidence would have been presented to a jury. The guilty plea allowed for sentencing to proceed without lengthy proceedings, though it meant acknowledging full responsibility for what occurred. In 2014, Thompson was sentenced to 110 years in prison. The lengthy sentence reflected both the killing during a robbery and the pattern of criminal activity leading up to it. Indiana's sentencing guidelines treated robbery-related deaths as particularly serious, warranting maximum consequences. The 110-year term effectively means Thompson will spend the rest of his life incarcerated, with no realistic possibility of release even if he lives to advanced age. The sentence sent a message about consequences for using deadly force during property crimes. For Ndiaye's family, the sentence provided some measure of justice, though nothing could restore their loss. Evalade Ndiaye had been working to support himself and possibly family members, performing honest labor that ended because someone chose robbery over legitimate means of obtaining money. Thompson remains in an Indiana correctional facility, serving his 110-year sentence. His case file reflects a robbery spree that cost one person their life and resulted in his own permanent incarceration. The money he attempted to steal was negligible compared to the price both he and his victim paid. As of 2025, no updates suggest any possibility of sentence reduction or parole consideration. Thompson's case remains settled with the lengthy term continuing year after year. But the final case would shock an entire nation with its scale and brutality. Axel Rudakubana.
Axel Rudakubana. He is now rated officially as Britain's most dangerous prisoner after making more threats to attack prison staff.
On July 29, 2024, Southport, England, experienced one of its darkest days. Axel Rudakubana carried out a mass stabbing at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class attended by young participants. The attack would leave 3 dead and 10 others seriously injured, creating trauma that extended far beyond the immediate victims. Rudakubana was born in August 2006 in Cardiff to Rwandan parents who had fled the genocide in their home country. His early childhood appeared unremarkable, described by those who knew him as a normal youngster. Changes began around age 13 when he experienced targeting at Range High School, leading to his exclusion from that institution. The isolation that followed his school exclusion deepened during lockdowns. He became increasingly reclusive, spending time online where he encountered materials that radicalized his thinking. Anxiety and high-functioning conditions complicated his social interactions, leaving him further isolated from peers and positive influences. What warning signs were missed? Rudakubana had been referred to PREVENT, the UK's counter-radicalization program, 3 times. However, these referrals didn't result in effective intervention, partly because in-person visits weren't conducted. The failure of PREVENT to stop Rudakubana's radicalization would become a major focus of inquiries following the attack. His online activity included downloading an Al-Qaeda manual, materials that should have triggered more aggressive intervention. He also manufactured ricin, a deadly poison, in quantities that could have produced over 1,200 potential doses. The combination of weapons interest, radical materials, and poison production created a profile that should have resulted in serious attention from authorities. His family struggled to manage his transformation from unassuming student to someone obsessed with topics. His parents' own trauma from fleeing the Rwandan genocide may have complicated their ability to recognize and address warning signs in their son's behavior. The dance class attack was methodical and brutal. Victims suffered between 85 and 122 wounds each, indicating sustained and repeated strikes with the knife. The sharp-pointed blade was designed to inflict maximum damage, and Rudakubana wielded it with devastating effect against defenseless targets. When arrested, Rudakubana made a statement that shocked investigators. "I'm glad those children are dead." The callous declaration demonstrated complete lack of remorse and suggested satisfaction with the carnage he had created. His words provided insight into a mindset devoid of empathy or recognition of the humanity of his victims. How did the UK justice system respond to such an extreme case? The trial faced challenges including Rudakubana's disruptive behavior in court. He attempted to interrupt proceedings and showed contempt for the legal process, consistent with his post-arrest statements celebrating the deaths. Terrorism-related charges were added due to the materials found in his possession and the nature of the attack. In January 2025, Rudakubana was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 52 years before any parole consideration. The judge characterized his actions as pure evil, language rarely used in judicial pronouncements, but deemed appropriate given the circumstances. The 52-year minimum means Rudakubana will be in his 70s before eligibility for parole, and many expect he will never be released. The sentence effectively ensures he will spend his entire adult life incarcerated for what he did at age 17. Victim families described their continuous pain, grief that will persist long after legal proceedings conclude. The 3 young lives lost had barely begun, potential and possibilities erased by Rudakubana's calculated attack. The 10 injured survivors face long recovery processes, both physical and psychological. As of late 2025, Rudakubana is held at Belmarsh Prison, one of the UK's highest security facilities. Despite attacks on guards during his incarceration, he has had privileges restored, a decision that sparked controversy among those who believe he should face maximum restrictions given his behavior and lack of remorse. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.